What truth?
There is no spoon.
Aha! Aha!
What's up, guys? This is gonna be a quick one. I get comments along the following vein a lot. Praying for a new car is not Buddhism, or Nichiren Buddhism is too materialistic. Usually, these complaints are coming from people who practice outside of the Nichiren lineage, so the misunderstandings are understandable. If I were to get up and start speaking about Dzogchen, I'd probably have a lot of misunderstandings too. Why? Because it's a different form of Buddhism. It'd be like if a biologist showed up at a lecture and decided to talk about quantum physics. It really wouldn't make much sense. In the West, we tend to think of all Buddhism as having the same endgame, i.e. the cessation of suffering. While this may be true, there are hundreds of lineages out there, and each has its own method of bringing about this change. In that sense, not all Buddhism is the same. On top of that, there is this misconception that quote-unquote real Buddhism entails these strict precepts and meditation practices. Once again, this is true for some schools, but not all. In fact, some of the biggest schools in Asia focus primarily on the practice of chanting rather than sitting meditation because it's more accessible, promising the same results without the huge time commitment certain meditation practices require. So let's return to the subject of this video. Earthly desires are enlightenment. How is it possible to chant for a new house or car? Isn't Buddhism against the trappings of the physical world? When you begin the process of chanting towards a specific desire, you are actively using that desire as fodder for your practice. Nichiren once wrote that physical desires are like the kindling to the fire of Buddhahood. In Western terms, this practice is alchemical in nature, as we are taking a desire, something base, and turning it into something pure via our practice. Real-world efficacy, i.e. tangible, this worldly results, have been part of Buddhist cultures for centuries. In much of Western Buddhism, however, these ideas have been slowly stripped away so that Buddhism can be more consumable. Walk into most Dharma centers across America, and you'll find mostly well-to-do people who don't have to worry about where that next meal is coming from or whether or not they're going to be able to pay the rent this month. You'll find people who practice a Buddhism that encourages separation from the material world because they can afford to be separate from it. Now, there's nothing wrong with this, but what about the people who don't have that luxury? When I frequented the Dharma Center in my area, I met a lot of good, well-meaning people. But these were also people who could afford to do something like take months off at a time to go on retreat. What about the person who is living from paycheck to paycheck? How accessible is something like that for them? Accessibility to the Dharma is the main reason why Nichiren formulated his practice of chanting Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. Whereas some schools would tell you to separate from the material world completely, Nichiren's teaching is that one does not need to give up the world. One doesn't need to extinguish their desires. Instead, they can transmute them into their own awakening by means of chanting Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. Want a new car? Fine. Need to pass a test? Okay. Want to hit your sales quota for the month? Great. These and everything else are perfectly fine to chant for. So let's jump back to this idea of accessibility for a moment. Believe it or not, the methods of meditation prescribed by some of the sutras and schools aren't completely accessible to all people. There are people who cannot follow their breath. There are people who cannot visualize. Granted, most people struggle with these things at first, but developing the concentration needed for them takes time that many people simply don't have. I mean, getting into states of bliss and conversing with otherworldly beings is cool and all, but how does that help you pay the rent or put food on the table? When I first began meditation practice, I found a manual that prescribed at least a few hours of practice every day. At the time, I was in college full-time and working part-time. Needless to say, I didn't have the time to meditate for such long periods, and simply accepted the idea that Buddhism as a practice wasn't for me. Luckily, I found my first meditation teacher who taught me a more accessible approach to meditation. And I eventually from there made my way to Nichiren Buddhism, which is accessible to everyone. Nichiren Buddhism is very much a practice of this worldly results, because most people need to be active in this world. Now, if you can afford to drop everything and take on the robes of a monk, then more power to you. However, this is a Buddhism for the everyday person. Anyone can practice this Buddhism. I actually once met a former monk who adopted the practice because he wanted to live a normal life. I once heard someone disparagingly call Nichiren's Buddhism poor man's Buddhism. When I told a Japanese Young Men's Division member about this, he boldly said the following: "I take pride in the fact that this is a Buddhism for all people. Yes, this is a Buddhism for the poor, the rich, and everyone in between. Everyone deserves to be happy." Okay guys, let's wrap this up. I jumped around a little bit today. You heard a little bit of my life experience, and you also got a little bit of why we chant for material things in this Buddhism. I'm going to leave some links in the description. If you liked the video, please feel free to give it a like. If you like the content on this channel, please feel free to subscribe. If you're new to my content and you want to engage with me, you want to comment or something, feel free to leave a comment or send me a message. I'm always looking forward to getting new messages in my inbox. With that said, Namu to the Buddha and you. This was Kofi Asante Sadzin, aka the Afro Sattva, signing off. Peace!